they delayed the spooky battlefield update. Ooh. So yeah, we'll do the randoms for a little bit. Oh, spooky things in the corner of my eye spooking me again. And spooky AI vanishing, too. It's not good. Oh, I think if the pip is on, it's set the lag. And I don't think there's a way I can disable it. I'll have to look real fast. Oh, if I look in the HUD, I can turn off all the HUD. It doesn't look like there's a thing for that. Nothing there. Can't get rid of it there. So that's just a thing I'll have to live with because it's distracting. For random loadouts is when I have pip enabled shippos. Oh, killed the other one. Is random still? Yeah, it should be, because I'm on 4 kills, not 5. For some reason, I thought I'd be on 5. That's when it switches your loadout. Okay, so... Okay, I got the fix me key match real fast. There we go to the alternate ones. I figured lag pip is still more compatible with how I want to aim at people. But man, I want a ship that doesn't have an attic. Also just very easy. Oh, I got one. We got lerms. Look at that lerm. You need to stop going blah at me. It's not healthy for you. Aw, it almost did it. Yeah, so not having pips is way more fun. There we go. The G-force is different because it's picking between like the hard G-forces and none. That's like my only options. Whereas I think nowadays I definitely prefer none, which makes sense because I like my arcade games. So I'd be naturally biased to having no G-forces at all, but I did like the old when it was symmetrical. Still, it's like, yeah, I miss it. I miss it bad. It was way spookier. It made the game feel a lot more like Battlescape in a few ways, but ways that are favorable, because that's the floomp. Which is now, I think, Battlescape has a few advantages in terms of the flying, which is like, well, you got more movement going on. It's like, this Battlescape has more potential for 3D relative positioning nonsense, which makes it awfully scary. Oh, we had to learn fitter. Oh, can. Oh, okay. Oh, we didn't get a good tracking of him. He was too quiet. Probably. I don't remember how my alarms work. Civil PLC. Okay. So let's use the plasma. Even though I need to take my hands-off keys to use them. I'll be fine. Whee! But it's a deficiency in, like, the controls. But we're never going to get rid of it because I never use double weapons anyway, so I don't need to worry about efficiency. And if I do use double weps, it's always like a miss goal, so I don't need to worry about not being able to have all the keys on the buttons. It's fine. So, how many games have we lost recently for flight models? Well, at least that's the thing I can give Battlescape credit for. They didn't change the flight model that much. And I guess Elite Dangerous is in that category. Like, man, why is it always gotta be changing flight models? So that means Elite Dangerous and Battlescape are even more in the same category than I already realized they actually were. which is very spooky. Oh, wasn't paying attention. Where Battlescape ruined itself from very strange design choices for having the basic stuff work. But heavy cannon and Rocco's. Oh, we got a boost. That's nice. Oh, he had no shields. Okay, that was good. Stretch the missiles out, you know. Yeah, so basically, we've gone through Elite Dangerous, Drone, Battlescape, and Hunter Notes. And I've gone through, I hit the point with every single game where I'd rather find something else. If possible, but I think I'm not gonna find anything better than Hunter Note. Period. Nesh, I make the game of myself, so it's I've had another point where it's also not a Hunter Note type game. There's other type of game moves I'd want to play for like RPGOs and RTSOs that also do not currently exist as far as I'm aware. It's like a very casual RTS and at least 3 different types of RPG. With the exception of one is getting made, which is the Saucy RPG. I find it weird that's the one that's getting made, but okay. Oh, we got some running on this. Yeah, Flag's also just like piss easy. It's not very much fun to use. I think Gat's slightly more fun to use just because you can, has more strict like tolerances on how much you can shoot it for, so it feels like it encourages you to be more accurate with your shots. You know, it's fun. It's like Flax, like, yeah, it's, you just smash it. Oh, we might get it. Oh, almost. Oh, and I think power burning might still be a problem. Well, it's not as bad as it used to be. By bad, it's like more obnoxious. Because the current speed complicated tismery does mean that you can't like run away if someone like wants to get you. Except you still can. Just means you can't run away in like a dogfight, whereas you used to be able to do both without too much difficulty. missiles, come on. Yeah. That's funny. Let's repair the bomber. Because that will take longer. Let's see, it makes sense. You repair the bomber, which takes longer than repairing the other thing. Light, yes. Repairing the light. That would go quick. This is gonna go slow. So it's a very smart idea to pick this instead. I'm not sure how much else is going on in general, because I did definitely figure out that I think I prefer Empyrean over Space Engineers, even though Space Engineers has the good update out. Problem is, Empyrean was getting steady updates for a while. And I'm interested what they could like add to Empyrean, because it feels relatively finished as a game. So I'm wondering, like, what are they gonna add to it? Because it feels like it's, you know, fleshed out, whereas Space Engineers feels like it's like missing stuff. It's like, this makes me curious about Empyrean. So I feel like, are they gonna like change infantry combat a little bit against the AI? Because I think they should definitely like rebalance / overhaul the infantry AIs and make change space combat a little bit. With, like, you know, how movement is. Might make it more fun. Always got a lot of missiles. Woo! Alright, now. Oh, we got another GAT. Okay. Oh, we have rocks too. I'll use the GAT. Oh, and a Hoovu. Definitely don't want to use that. So, with this kind of an AI, how would I want to make it, like, better? Because, well, I think having them not be all in the same AI would be very helpful. Because they already have dynamic, like, movement considerations, so that means that if it's in a light, heavy, or bomber, they already feel slightly different. So I think if they could change their behavior based on what weapon they have, if they would go to a different target distance and be more like that would be a decent way. Make it where Vol AIs want to brawl you, and then learn AIs just run away all the time and poke you viciously. And Plasma AI likes to ambush you. It specifically targets ships that aren't targeting it, so it actually works as an assassin. Because that'd be fun if that was how it worked. They'd sneak around a lot. And then if you could have it where if a Plasma AI knew it was detected, it would try to run away more than anything else. It would only like fight after if it couldn't run away for like a certain amount of time. And then it would fight you. But otherwise it would try to run away more than anything else. And if it's a team fight, it'll just retreat to its own base and like fly around its base. And if it makes it to its base, then it will start fighting you. cool behavior for just any AI using a plasma. That's like the main use case for plasma. I don't know what you'd do with rock AI. Maybe those could be the AIs that try to bomb things. So instead of having it where bombers will always target the capital ship, it's any AI which picks rockets will basically be functioning as a bomber, even if it's a light that picked rockets. So it would go try to hit the capital ship more than anything else. And then it will try to target bombers and then heavies and then lights if it can't. If it's like free for all and there's no capital ship to target, it would just basically hunt after bombers first. It would just go from biggest to smallest. I just realized, what else do we got? That's a SRS, okay. And we're out of those already, because it remembered how much ammo I had on the other things. Alright, need to repair the heavy now before it dies on me. But Infurion still has the same problem that all the other buildy games run into in terms of combat, which is their surface area metas instead of volume metas, which means you feel encouraged to build very small instead of large, because the larger you make something, it just inherently is inefficient. And it's where if you ever had like outnumbering, it'd be where it's very difficult for one ship to kill two ships. It's like very hard, especially in Infurion, because Infurion does enforce like turret number caps and ceilings. So if you make the smallest ship possible, which uses all the turrets, it will just do very well if you could just produce them en masse, versus making like a proper battleship type thing. It just won't have any chance of ever doing anything, because it would have the same firepower as like a heavy corvette that was just made entirely of guns. Which is like one of the first things I built, and didn't feel the need to build anything else, because that was a capital ship that did everything I needed it to. Because it was planet worthy too, so. It was essentially a mobile base that could effectively 1v1 anything that was PvE related. And that was like 2 to 3 years ago in Empyrean, so that was why I like, you know, got bored, because it's like, oh, the first ship I built is like in function just everything I'd ever need, and I never need to do anything else. Like, I don't feel encouraged to make a small fighter and use that for combat, because the main ship can be used for combat, and it's very good at it. It's like, I don't feel encouraged to make a transport ship, because it's like, well, the main ship has a lot of cargo too, so there's no reason to do that. It's like, it's the problem. Like, yeah, the main ship is like such a good multi-purpose ship that there's just no point in making anything specialized. Which I think they're trying to encourage you to have more than one ship in Infurion by having like the CPU tiers. So you have a limited like amount of stuff you can put on, but it feels more, it's at the point where it feels more arbitrary what you can and can't put on a ship, because Like, putting a constructor is like 10,000 CPU, but putting on like one extra large thruster is like 500,000 CPU. It's like, okay, what is like your intention here? Because putting guns on is like 5,000 each per gun, so if you have a tier 2 or better ship, you can like fully equip it with any guns you want. But it's like only a handful of blocks that take you to the millions in terms of the CPU. And I guess the thing I'm wondering is, like, are they trying to make XL thrusters like specialized for like extremely heavy ships? Because the only advantage the XL thrusters have is like fuel efficiency and power density. Because they're also kind of hard to make. Well, that's the other thing I need to think about that destroyer I'm making is I don't know if I wanted the up armor on the inside at all. Because in Inferion, you need to make layered armor, because I don't know how much of a issue lag shooting is, but even if it's not a big issue, doing layered armor where you use, you know, something like half blocks, like there's other blocks you can use. I like using the half blocks where it makes a air gap in the armor, but it's still like 75% of like the health pool. And it also reduces the weight a little bit too. It's like, you just do layers of that so that if a shot lags through the first layer of armor, it will hopefully hit the second layer of armor and it won't lag through it. Because people figured out really early on that if you have one solid piece of armor, if it lags through the first layer of cubes, it will lag through more than likely the entire plate. And the only way to get it to not do that is to have air gaps in it. So that's like what I did. There was like a handful of areas in that ship that had like the roof armored and whatnot. But the broadsides aren't armored. They just have one layer. So if I up armored it, like, well, they could have two, which I think. And in some I can't up armor in all spots, but I can definitely armor in a few spots. Like the bigger internal rooms, I can absolutely put an extra layer of armor. Just to make it so that if your shields go down, you have a lot of whole survivability. Because the turrets are already all their retractable versions, which gives them not only damage reduction if they're retracted, but they have a bigger health pool, period, when they're the retractable variant of the turret. So it's usually better just to build retractable turrets, even if you don't care to have them retracted, just because, well, they'll have more health. It's like the only reason to not build the retractable turrets is if you want to be like ultra compact with your, you know, turrets, which isn't very necessary in how the game works, because you have overabundance of surface area and, well, you know, you have overabundance of volume, and like surface area is what's at like the premium. So having like a slightly like shorter turret isn't gonna help you that much with making as compact a ship as possible. Like it'll make it like, you know, one block shorter, but you're not really gonna notice a big difference, and you probably just prefer to have all the turrets just have like 50% more health instead. Especially when they had it where the retractable turrets didn't weigh more than the non-retractable ones, but they did fix that. So that does put a use of non-retractable turrets as being more helpful on civilian ships, because they can weigh less. The only problem is weight does matter a little bit in Inferion. It doesn't matter enough to make you think about reducing weight, really. doesn't matter that much, especially because you do have a few sustainable fuel sources besides just mining it. And even then, if you decide to mine a bunch of fuel, you're gonna have like a crap ton of fuel. Even if your ship isn't very fuel efficient, it's like, it's more making it fuel efficient just makes the ship less annoying. It doesn't really, and you're not really improving the ship that much. So it's like, I feel like they have room to make it better for engineering, but they're not taking advantage of that. So like, maybe they'll take more advantage of engineering aspects in the game and make it harder to engineer like a good ship, because it's pretty easy, which might be kind of what they're going for, because the game's kind of meant to be a survival game more than anything else. It's not really supposed to be an emphasis on the engineering. It's like, well, it's more meant so that you play it as an infantry game and you just have spaceships and stuff in it, because that's how you get from planet to planet. And there's also a little bit of space combat too, but it's not a big focus of the game, which is why Space Engineers is more irritating, because it's supposedly they care more about the engineering aspect, but it's, in some ways, it's like easier of an engineering game than Empyrean is, when Space Engineers is supposed to be an engineering game, but it ends up being just a more architectural game. But the only advantage Space Engineer has, it allows you to make very complicated engineering. So like, you know, bad engineering where it's very complicated instead of simple. So, you know, basically German engineering, where everything is like 5 steps more complicated than it has to be for a 10% quality improvement. So the only like really good engineering game I know of is like From the Depths, because that's the only one where it's feels like the most realistic in terms of designing vehicles, even though a lot of parts of the game aren't realistic, but the actual vehicle building and design feels the most realistic, while still being, you know, fun. Like they make it where armor is like, you know, useful, which is fun. So it's like there's a point to armoring versus real life where, well, people don't think there's a point to armoring, where I think we just don't know how to armor boats anymore. Because main battle tanks, like, well, if it hits the front of a main battle tank, like, they're armored. They can survive a lot of munitions. They can't survive absolutely everything, but there's a lot of stuff that can hit a main battle tank that it can survive against, versus all warships where anything like a crap ton of munitions will be able to do damage to. And the other thing, it's like, well, I know there's not an issue with speed, because there were fast battleships during World War II that would still go 30 knots. And they were still, like, you know, armored like how a battleship would be. Like, very well armored. Like, more armored than any other piece of military hardware would have been ever in like, history. I still think World War II battleships, in some ways, superiorly armored to, like, main battle tanks. Especially with having better deck armor. Because I think to this day, main battle tanks still have, like, very thin top armor, even though that's getting very taken advantage of. Especially because of missiles is like the main way. It's like all you need to do is aim the missile into the roof, and then you'll be able to kill a tank with a missile that doesn't even have very good AP, because most missiles don't have very good armor piercing capabilities for better, you know, explosive yields. Because when your method of delivering a basic HE is very expensive, you damn well want to make sure you're maximizing the payload per missile, because that's gonna be a giant cost saving. The second you start reducing the HE payload on the missile is when it becomes even more, like, expensive than it already is. It's not very good. And that's why if you made missile interceptors, which don't even need to have a payload, so you make it where anti-missile missiles are cheaper than the missiles they intercept. So it makes it where missiles are like the greatest counter to themselves in terms of cost effectiveness. It's like the only issue, it's like, well, you just need to make it where an anti-missile missile will hit the missile it's intended to hit. What shouldn't be that hard, because what should happen is you can get an anti-missile missile hitting missiles, and then it'll probably be so good that main missiles will need to have evasive maneuvering for when an anti-missile missile's sent against it. Which then makes it where, well, it needs more fuel now, because it's going to be doing evasive maneuvers, which is going to lengthen the route it's going to take to its intended target, so it needs more fuel. And which either means reducing the payload or making a bigger missile. So they probably won't be able to make the missile any bigger, so they'll probably either resort to reducing payload, or what they'll do is instead of giving the missile more fuel to evade, they'll start armoring missiles to take hits, which will improve the AP effectiveness as a side effect, but it will make the explosive potential a lot worse. So you'll essentially just have, like, armor-piercing missiles for everything, because they're expected to get hit by missiles that intercept them. So you'll start having an arms race between missiles and anti-missile missiles, but because anti-missile missiles never need to have an explosive payload, they just need to be... they can just use sheer kinetic energy to defeat a missile. They'll always have the advantage, even in an arms race, if it came down to an arms race. It's like there's no way that the main sequence missile will ever be on top. Especially if you're already developing missiles with the ability to intercept drones, which is, as well as other munitions, because that's already what I know the US Navy is. That's the upgrade for, like, almost all Sea Whizzes, is that they're going to be changed to missile launchers that launch intercepting missiles. And then the missile launchers, they want to change some of the missile launchers to be anti-munition lasers instead, whenever the lasers are considered ready for, you know, mass adoption in the Navy, because they're not quite ready for, you know, universal adoption. They're still being tested, and they're proven to work. They just don't think that it's going to be, at this day in time, worth it over using, like, you know, the anti-missile missile system that's currently in place to be adopted. So this would mean that, like, for your main sequence missiles, the only real direction you could go that would make sense would be to have swarm launchers, even for, you know, your main damaging missiles, which is very bad for their main purpose of, you know, doing damage as a missile. And it means that suddenly actually armoring stuff is way better of an idea. Because if the only way a missile's gonna get through the missile defense is if there's like 100 of them at the same time, and like 25 of them are gonna get through, because it's 25 small warheads instead of one centralized warhead, that makes armoring way more effective as a means of protecting a ship against it. So you might see, like, if that's the direction missile warfare goes in, you might see, like, more armored warships in general. And if you start seeing more armored warships, there might be a vested interest to upgun naval caliber so that, you know, naval gun can actually deal with the armor on some boats, especially if you improve power density on PT boats and now they're armored like as well as a main battle tank all of a sudden, just for a PT boat. So it would be like, well, we need to deal with PT boats driving up to our carriers and shooting at them. It's a problem. So when you have that going on, be a decent incentive to upgun. Because most guns are 5-inch. I don't think they use anything bigger than 5-inch guns. Just because 5-inch guns are very general purpose anyway. I think that's why they're the only major caliber still in use in terms of naval cannonry. And then anything else that's a main gun is like a smaller caliber that's an autocannon. Because God knows they don't use manual loaded guns anymore. It's like, I'm pretty sure everything's autoloader. For naval, at least. Probably maybe not everything, but like I think the majority of it's auto-loading. You know, very interesting things of naval. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of missiles, just in general. It's like it's a very expensive way to deliver an explosion to a location. Because some TISMs say it's like, well, the missiles are like more accurate. It's like, well, like it's like they have more potential to be accurate. It's like with a sniper rifle versus a standard rifle. It's like, well, the sniper rifle has more capacity to be accurate. It's not always going to be more accurate, but it has more capacity to be accurate. And it's not even just a shooter if a sniper rifle. It's like, well, if a sniper rifle, you have to worry about, you know, wind. You need to worry about bullet drop more than you would. It's like there's a lot of factors to shooting a sniper rifle where while it will shoot the bullets in a straighter line because it's utilized at a greater range that reduces its accuracy just because of the distance involved, making calculating a correct shot be a lot more difficult. Especially when you need to hit a small, precise area with your shot. And same thing with missiles. Well, they have more ability to be accurate because they can adjust their in-flight trajectory, but that also runs the risk of not only that you need to worry about the missile adjusting its trajectory to miss when it would have hit on its current trajectory, which is the concept countermeasures like work off of, which is fooling the missile into changing its trajectory when its current trajectory is going to hit you. That's the entire concept countermeasures, because everyone knows that if someone's shooting you with a gun, a flare is not going to save you. It's whereas against a missile, it's like it might actually do something. So it's a, you know, situation where, you know, dumb fire projectiles don't have a worry. And some missiles I know, if they are getting fooled by countermeasures, if the missile realizes it's being fooled, it will just hold its old trajectory. But I don't think those are very common due to their propensity to go straight into like a innocent area somewhere that had nothing to do with the missile. I don't think those are very popular. They cause a lot of collateral damage, I think. And then, the other thing with missiles, because most missiles are not armored or particularly evasive to anything offensive against them, apart from some missiles have sheer speed and altitude on their side, which means at some point, technology will catch up to them. Especially because of how hot missiles are, because like the missiles are like really hot, especially if it goes fast, and because missiles are just ramjets for the vast majority of them, which are really, really hot. So the thermal signature is like insanely high on a missile, especially for how small it is. And the funny thing is radars might be catching up the missiles just because you have stealth aircraft being, you know, relatively popular as a design doctrine. You might get to the point where aircraft become so stealthy that they end up showing up as like missiles on a radar. So the only way to detect aircraft is to make the radar so good they can detect missiles like actually pretty well now. And the missiles aren't going to have any stealthing ability at all. The only reason a missile doesn't get detected is because it's a lot smaller than an aircraft is. So when you start getting to the point where the stealth race for fighter jets gets to the point where radars are now able to detect missiles of no problem, suddenly you have a very good way of detecting missiles to then, you know, launch more precise countermeasures against those missiles. Because not only do you have a good thermal signature on the missile, possibly a good visual signature on it. Because missiles are not known to be stealthy when they're in the air due to leaving, you know, very big smoke trails as well as having giant, you know, engine flares. So they're not stealthy visually. They're definitely not stealthy thermally. And in the future, they might not even be stealthy against radar compared to, you know, sophisticated fighter craft that have had, you know, a stealth race essentially over the last like 50 years to make, you know, fighter jets stealthier and stealthier and stealthier. It's like suddenly missiles end up being a lot worse than it used to be. Because the only reason they were good in the first place was because it was a new technology and everything else has had to catch up to a missile really slowly. And some things like armoring technology just haven't really caught up to anything since the medieval period. There was like the brief moment in World War II where armoring a heavy tank would do something, and even armoring like a medium to have like a really good front plate would like massively help their survivability. Just kind of why main battle tanks, because there was a Tizami video saying that, oh, main battle tanks didn't come from heavy tanks. It's like, well, kinda, but it's like main battle tanks basically replaced every single tank class that existed back then, because there was no point to making, you know, a light tank anymore, because you could just have a dedicated scouting vehicle that was way, way better at scouting than a light tank could ever hope to be. Especially because when you put, like, you know, a decent gun on a scouting light tank, you just make it worse at scouting, and it's very likely it won't even be able to use that gun, and even if it could use that gun, if it was up against a medium or heavy tank, there would just be no way for that gun to meaningfully damage the tank. So light tanks, it was just, even though you could maybe sacrifice the performance of the light tank to give it a very well-performing gun that would actually deal with some medium tanks. The main issue was medium tanks got to the point where it was very easy to put a extremely high performance gun in a medium tank hull and still have the medium tank be like very, you know, highly mobile, but it could easily deal with the armor of almost any heavy tank, especially even from the front, which would mean that the sides are like, you know, very easy to get through, which is not an acceptable situation due to the riskiness that using, you know, effective anti-tank tactics, you're gonna, if you're using a medium tanks against heavy, some of them are gonna end up hitting the sides of heavy tanks, so if they can, like, go through the front plate of a heavy tank without much issue, that's very detrimental to heavy tanks being useful. And that's why main battle tanks, because essentially the change of a main battle tank was changing the armoring so that the front has all the armor, essentially. Like, the front is insanely well armored. The sides are, like, armored up to, like, 20mm cannon. Because it's, like, you know, it's equivalent to 80mm of steel on the sides, whereas the front of a main battle tank would be, like, effectively a meter equivalent of steel for the armoring. So the front is, like, very, very well armored. The sides are basically non-existent against any serious anti-tank munitions, with the exception of sometimes you'll have ERA on the sides to, like, you know, defeat, like, if a missile happened to hit the sides. It's like you get one free consumption of that missile. And then the rear of a main battle tank is usually not very armored at all, even compared to the sides. It's like maybe armored up to BMG rounds in some cases, which also goes for the rear of the turret. Except the exception is, I believe the sides of the turret are still very well protected, but the rear is where I believe turret protection really falls off for a main battle tank. And then you also have the roof of the main battle tank is like very thin compared to the even like the side armor. It's like, you can, usually the, you know, roof armor is comparable to the rear armor most of the time, which is probably not going to be the case due to the amount of munitions taking advantage of exploiting the thin roof armor on main battle tanks. The A-10 Warthog being a very good example of a vehicle which entire existence takes advantage of the tops of tanks not being very well armored, which is why it's able to kill them very effectively with only 30mm rounds. Like, even though they are usually depleted uranium 30mm rounds, so they're the best armor piercing a 30mm round can have, but that just, all that really means is it doesn't need to hit the roof at a 90-degree angle to go through it. It means it could come in at much more oblique angles, like 30 degrees, and still be able to penetrate the roof of the tank. Oh, there's a ship after me. Oh, did it fly in the hangar? No, it went past our... This, little pesky bug. Frickin' trying to talk about winged battle tanks. And then, anything else in the military is, like, suicidal. It's like, if you were ever hit by any munition, someone's fucking dying. Which is one of the things I don't like, is, like, we don't really have hardly anything that is expected to survive a hit from projectiles that are realistically going to be fired against it. Because the only real exception is, well, the front of a main battle tank, and even then, there are some munitions they expect to be fired against a main battle tank's front armor that will go through the front armor. Mainly, like, the heavier side of anti-tank guided missiles. Up-to-date Hellfire missiles, because I think the older Hellfire missiles don't quite do it anymore, but all they had to do was like, oh, we can just increase the AP on it, and in some cases, heat is still, like, gonna be effective, even though there are ways you can deal with heat rounds. The most effective being, despacing the armor. But the problem with spacing the armor is you need a lot of volume to do effective spacing, which you don't really have in a main battle tank. You don't have room to put even a 1 foot air gap in the front plate. Like, you don't really have the room to do that, and that's gonna massively increase the weight of the tank, as you need to extend the top, bottom, and sides of that tank's armor to accommodate having an air gap in the front. Because the tank's already, like, there's not really any room on the existing tank chassis to add, like, an air gap. The best you could do is to add applique armor to it. You basically have post-production armor installed on the outside of it. That's probably the best chance you have to give it, like, some sort of spaced armor effect, which I think some tanks have that done, but it's not the usual case. That also helps with, like, a lot of extreme penetration warheads, just spaced armor, because most extreme penetration warheads are designed to burn fast and loud really, really quickly to give them that very good penetration effect, which means that the warhead is usually a very specific shaped explosion that goes in basically a small straight line, and that's what it has to be to give it, its armor-piercing characteristics. If it was like a normal method of penetrating the tank, and it worked on a wider area than it does, it just wouldn't work. It's why Sabo rounds are really good at piercing. It's because it's like the thinnest projectile you could possibly make that wouldn't just shatter upon being launched, and wouldn't shatter upon impact, but would actually penetrate. Because if you made Sabo rounds any thinner, they would just destroy themselves upon hitting the armor, even if they had, like, a better hardness than the armor. Just because they're just no longer bulky enough to maintain their structure due to the forces they're going to experience hitting the armor. And there might be an argument for making very specific Sabo rounds that actually will deform by the time they penetrate the armor, but I don't think that's a thing, because I don't know how you could accomplish that. Because if it does deform, it's like, well, if it deforms by the time it goes to the front plate, it's gonna do a lot more damage on the inside of the tank. Because it's gonna cover more surface area, because it's, like, all shrapnel-y and bent out of shape. So it's gonna coat the insides in, a lot of shrapnel, which is gonna do a lot more internal damage than if it was an intact rod, because it would just go straight in and possibly straight out, because once you get through the front plate, there's not much armor left, so it's very likely it will go through the whole tank, unless it hits, like, Citadel armoring. Like, if it hits the ammo, it's like, well, it's not going to also go through the ammo, because most ammo storages are Citadel armored. It's possibly better than the front of the tank is. On some main battle tanks, is the armor is more well armored than the front of the tank. It's like, that's the areas where you'll hear about depleted uranium being used in an armor roll. And the main reason is, well, if a, you know, extreme penetrator warhead goes to the front of the tank, there's a very good chance that your crew are still going to be alive, and that a lot of the systems in the tank are still going to be operational if one, you know, Sabo round goes through the front of the tank, or just a shaped charge that goes in a straight line. It's probably going to leave the crew intact and most of the equipment. But if the ammo gets hit, the tank's fucked. It's like, if the ammo gets hit, it chain reacts, the whole tank is going to be blown apart. And so not only do you lose the tank crew, you lose the tank. It also means that if you had any intention of salvaging the vehicle, there's not going to be anything left to salvage that's valuable. It's just a wreck. I mean, for one thing, you're not going to salvage the ammo because it all went up. So it's like, there's like so many reasons as to why the ammo getting hit is the worst possible thing that could happen. It's like, because you basically, it totals the tank to where there's nothing to salvage anymore, because anything that was valuable is destroyed. Everyone inside the tank is just dead. It's like, the only hope they would have of survival is if one of them was using the external hatch open and was using it just to get a better view outside the tank. He was the only person who might have a chance of survival if he realized that the tank was, like, hit and the ammo. So he would need to have, like, foresight and have the know-how to, like, jump out of the tank. And even then, he's probably still dead. Like, this is the only person I could see having, like, the possibility of living. Because anyone else outside the tank is just doomed. Because even if he makes it outside the tank, is like, well, it's a giant explosion when all the ammo's going off. So, very possible that shrapnel will shoot off from the outside of the tank to anything near it if the ammo went up. I mean, you definitely want to leave that frickin', you know, hatch open if you did escape the tank when the ammo is hit, because that might mean that, because the explosion has a low resistance area to escape to, the tank won't contain the explosion, and it will instead focus the explosion through that hole in its structure. Which is way better for if you wanted to survive outside the tank. Otherwise, if the tank was still mostly sealed, it would try to contain the explosion. Yeah. Yeah, I believe. I do remember that about the Abrams, which is the ammo is supposed to not kill the crew if it was breached. At least if it wasn't from the front. If it was from the sides of the rear, they'd be fine. But if the ammo was breached from the front, there's already a hole for the ammo explosion to go through, so it's just going to be devastating to the whole tank. It's like the same would go for like a warship, where it's like, it's only going to... If the ammo's like sealed off from the front, that's only going to help you if it wasn't breached from the front. Because if it was still breached from the front, that would just mean if you were breached from the rear or the sides, you're probably gonna... If it's from the rear, that probably means you're destroying the engine. And if it's from the sides, it's like there might be some auxiliary components that get damaged, but otherwise you'd probably... The tank would still be, like, you know, salvageable and the crew would still be alive, but they would be stuck with a defunct tank at that point, which is very sad for him. And even then, if the ammo does manage to contain the explosion completely, that does run the risk of, because the shock is going to get transmitted through the material, that you're going to have a lot of internal spalling that will do various damage anywhere anyway, even though the explosion was successfully contained. It's like the shockwave might still be somewhat lethal. And more importantly, it's like there'll be, you know, internal spalling. Although that's probably not as much for us the ammo, because I believe they're usually made of depleted uranium, which I don't think is known to have particularly egregious spalling characteristics. And even if it does, you know, they probably have spall liners around just the ammo in case the inside of the ammo is to go. As well as just having, you know, wet storage where you can, which massively helps ammo not exploding in the ammo rack. Wet storage. It's fun. Alright, I'm gonna kill this light, and then that's all the stroming I'm gonna do for the day. Just having fun with the random shippos. I did it for the whole hour, to varying levels of skill, mostly bad. Pretty bad level of skill, I would say. Alright. Thank you for watching.